Welcome to Live Channel Denmark. Today we are so blessed having a good friend of mine with me here in studio, Janie Unruh from Canada. And I met Janie first time 2 years ago. Then she suddenly showed up in my church in Norway. And I don't believe that things happens accidentally. So both Jenny and we both love Jesus very much, and both of us are very much interested in the health message. So we have spent quite much time together talking about these subjects. And today we are so happy that she can join us here and tell her story, how she became, first how she became an atheist, why did she become an atheist, and how she became a Christian. And on the first slide here, I think this slide represents very much of Janie. It says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God that he give it to all men liberally and unbraided not, and it shall be given him. And as I know Janie, she is always studying, she's always looking for more truth. And even if I know Janie a little bit, I don't know so very much about her background. How did she learn all the things she knows? And then I looked up on Facebook to see if I could find something about her there. And she has actually been the speaker with Kuwadi's media and television ministry. And she has also been a freelance writer on health topics with Barry Star Journal. She has been a medical missionary with Adventist Frontier Missions and Quiet Hour, ADRA, and others. She has traveled to over 30 countries, most of them as a medical ministry, giving medical and humanitarian aid to the poorest of the poor. She has been attending the US Army for over 7 years as a field medic. And this invaluable experience gave her the experience and courage to later do what God called her to do on the mission field. Dr. Janie earned as a PhD and Master in Public Health with an emphasis on reversing and preventing disease through the whole foods plant-based diet. She has been working in the capacity for over 20 years, since coming to know the Lord and learning of the Bible health message. Dr. Janie is now certified raw food teacher and certified blood analyst. She's health consultant, a public speaker in lifestyle and vegan raw living foods. Her business is progressively raw wellness. Contact her, and here you can see her contact information. She has been married to Dr. Perry Unruh for 8 years and in remote forest setting with their federal wildcats while they continue to rescue. Together they grow an organic garden and greenhouse. So this is a sister which really have been doing studying very much in life, and I'm really looking forward for her to share her story now. And we are going, as I said, we are going to have many programs with Janie. So let's pray. Yes, Father in heaven, we are just so grateful that nothing happens accidentally in life. We are so thankful that, Lord, that you guided me together with Janie. And I'm so thankful for everything you have taught her in life. It's so encouraging, Lord, to know that even atheists, that they can turn around and want to get to know you and be powerful workers in your vineyard. Thank you that you will bless now as Janie is going to share with us, and I pray that it will be an encouragement for all the viewers. In Jesus' name, amen.
thank you, Eva, for inviting me. I'm always thrilled whenever I can share the story of the Lord, because truly this is not a story and of me, nor is any testimony a testimony of a human, but instead it's a testimony of God and his saving grace and his saving power and his massive amount of love to save each person. In my life, he has showed again and again that he wants me in heaven, as I know that he wants every single human being living on this earth to be in heaven. He calls each one of us. And if he can call me out of atheism a staunch atheist, then I know that he can call anybody, and the answer can be had by anybody. You asked me to first share how I became an atheist and then how I became a Christian. At 16 years old, after my mom and dad had divorced, I moved out on my own, and I didn't really want to live with my mom or dad. And so I got myself an apartment. I got myself a job, got myself back into high school after I'd been out for a while. Figured I need to make something of myself if I don't start getting my act together. Like most young people, or many young people, I was into the world very much. I was into drugs and promiscuity and wild parties, things that I'm not very proud of now, but they did make up who I was at that time. So here I am on my own. I'm now living in my own apartment at 16 years old, realizing that there's nobody in this world who was going to take care of me. I felt all alone, and I realized that I had to take care of myself, that there was nobody else who was going to take care of me, and I had to now start making my own life. I was raised in a home with my mom and dad where we went to church several times a year, mainly what I would consider to be a holiday Christian. I'm sure we went to church a few other times, but mainly I remember going to a Lutheran church Christmas time, Easter, a few other times throughout the year. We were sent to Sunday school for a week during the summer, every summer. But other than that, I don't really remember much church. In the few times that we did go, I remember sitting on the floor at my parents' feet under the pew and just coloring. I don't remember anything, what was said. It meant nothing to me, and it was empty. And as I was sitting there at 16 years old in my own apartment, I thought, I need to decide my own path now. And so I started looking at my beliefs. I started looking at who I was as a person, who I become at 16 years old, and what I wanted to become in the future. One of those things that I had to make a decision about was church. Was I going to continue going to church or not going to church? Was this something that I believed, or was this something that was put upon me because it was the way that I was raised? So I remember sitting down in a chair and just in contemplation, I started thinking about church. I started thinking about God. At this time, there were three things that really stuck out to me as I was wondering, church or no church, God or no God. I started looking at the people around me who called themselves a Christian. And there were several, but of the people that called themselves a Christian, I actually didn't want anything to do with Christianity if that's the way people are, or God was, or that's the way people are if they're a Christian. I said, there's no way that I want to be like that if that's what Christianity means. So one was looking at the people around me. which I know now was an error, but that's where I was at the time. Number two was because of Santa Claus. In my young 16-year-old mind, I thought, I was told Santa Claus was real, but yet I found out later he wasn't, and felt like a fool for believing, because I felt laughed at. I felt like I was deceived. And people were laughing at a belief that really they thought was cute, but once I found out the truth, I didn't think it was so cute. I extrapolated that to God. God also, I could not see, like Santa Claus, I couldn't see. I started thinking about how if Santa Claus wasn't real because I can't see him, then how can God be real if I can't see him? So that was number two. And I didn't want to be made a fool again. And I then for my second reason was, if Santa Claus isn't real, then God must not be real. How can I believe in Santa Claus if I can't see him? How can I believe in God if I don't see him? And the third thing was about the belief in hell, in which I was told. I was told that people will burn forever and ever and ever in heaven, in hell. And I thought, how would a God ever do that to somebody? That is so mean. That is so cruel. How could that even be possible? And if there is a God that would burn people in hell forever and ever and ever, I thought, there is no way that I want anything to do with a God like that. So for those three reasons, I then became an atheist. I then started to think about evolution and about how we supposedly came from apes. Because now I had to figure out where we came from. You know, if we didn't come from a God, where did we come from? Well, I thought that believing in God was completely ludicrous, and there was no way at this moment. I became an atheist and thought, there is no way that there's a God. I don't buy it. So as I start thinking about evolution and thinking about that we came from apes, and then my mind started thinking about all of the insects and the animals on the land and the air and in the sea. And I thought, you just don't see any of them morphing from one being to another. And they are what they are. When they have babies, they have babies that look like themselves. So I immediately threw out evolution as well. To me, that was just as ludicrous as an answer as there was a God. So I knew that there must have been another way of how this earth began and how people populated this earth. But to me, that wasn't a viable answer either. So here I was at 16 years old. I immediately, in those thoughts, in that conversation that I had with myself as I was in contemplation, I became an atheist. Then for the next 12 years, to not think about God at all. Didn't think about him, didn't talk about him. It never even occurred to me that he was real. He was so far from my mind that it was just a non-existent topic. There just was nothing. There was no afterlife. There was no reincarnation. There was just literally nothing. And that's how I lived my life then for the next 12 years until my senses came to me and I found the truth. So fast forward from 16 years old, at 18, I then joined the military and gained a lot of experience from there, which I look back now and see that God actually used that experience to really help me on many of the mission trips that he's led me on. Fast forward a few years after I got out of the military, then I started to go to college. I was a medic in the military, in the U.S. Army, and I I was going to college to become a registered nurse. So I was going to California State University in San Bernardino, California, and I had just gotten to California, and within the first week, I was sitting in front of the library, and this gorgeous man comes and sits next to me. And within a few minutes, we start talking, and we find interest in each other. We date a few times, and it's pretty clear that we were truly soulmates. We started to date more serious. We were pure adrenaline junkies together. We were into fast motorcycles, into fast quads. We were into fast cars. We would often race together from one place to another. We just had a lot of fun. We had a lot of friends. We lived for ourselves. We lived really for no other reason than to finish college, to start a career, but we lived strictly to ourselves. We lived to a point of things that made us happy, and didn't really. We were never. We were just more focused on ourselves, not really thinking about the bigger world around us. We continued to date for several years, and it was pretty obvious that we had fallen in love. Now, at that time, I did not want to marry anybody. I was more interested in dating for the rest of my life. He wasn't interested in being married. So we just kind of decided year after year that we would be an item without being married. We fell deeply in love. He was a man who was loved by everybody, a man who was happy all the time and had a great amount of friends and influence. And we just loved being around each other. We had many friends who surrounded us all the time, always had things to do, always in for a life of excitement. And we were in for the experience of a life of which we didn't know. I had realized that I had fallen in love with him at some point years earlier, and it took several years for us to even tell each other that we loved each other. But the first time that we said it, we knew. We just knew that we were going to be together forever. Truly what people would call soulmates at that time, where so much of our lives interconnected, so many of our goals that we wanted to reach interconnected, many of our friends interconnected. We had so much going for us that it was pretty obvious that we were going to probably spend the rest of our life together. As he finished out his degree in management, and I was finishing up my degree in a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing, just as he graduated 1 year before I did, he asked me to marry him. And I said yes and no. He said, well, what does that mean? Is that yes or no? And I said, that's no for right now, but ask me again once I graduate from college and I'll say yes, because I want to finish college and I didn't want to be one of the wives who girlfriend and boyfriend get married in college, and oftentimes wife drops out in order to help the new husband now to get through college, and then she never goes back again because then kids get in the picture. And I wanted to finish a college education, and I was pretty focused on that. That was pretty much my goal. So we continued our year until I finished school, and he asked me to marry him again. And I said yes. That was in May of '94. And we set our wedding date then for May of '95. However, we bought a house together We're in the middle of buying a house together. We had just signed some papers. Had already gotten our finance from the bank and moving ahead in that direction, making a life together. And then the unthinkable happened. 3 weeks after we were engaged, we found out he had cancer. We didn't know what it was or anything, but 1 year prior to this point, he had some symptoms that led me to believe that he had cancer. And I had asked him to go to the doctor. After several months of me trying to encourage him to go to the doctor, he did finally go. And the doctor told him, you go home and tell your girlfriend that you're too young for cancer. That doctor did no tests and sent him home to do some home remedies like a sitz bath and just to call if he continues to bleed. After he came home, he did what the doctor recommended. He stopped bleeding and I stopped worrying. A year later, I noticed some more symptoms come up in him, and I told him again, I really think, I'm remembering from your last time a year ago when you were bleeding, and I think that you really need to go get checked for cancer again. Because when my husband came home that first time when that doctor told him to go home and tell his girlfriend that he's too young for cancer, I told him immediately, you need a second opinion. You need another doctor. You can't stay with this doctor. Any doctor who would say anything like that is way out of line. So please go get another doctor. He would not go see another doctor until a year later when I pressed it upon him again that I believed he had cancer again. And I didn't know where it was or what kind of cancer or I couldn't tell him that, but he was starting to have symptoms. And he had a growth that started on his forehead that just came out of nowhere. And then he also had a mole that started to grow just unexplainably. So I told him, please go get checked again. By this time, he had gone and changed insurances with his company. And he went to go see this second opinion a year later. And this is when they found his cancer. It had been already growing for at least a year. That was in mid-May of 95. And then he was scheduled to have surgery around the 1st of June. Somewhere, give or take a few days there in 94. And the doctors assured us that everything was going to be fine, that the cancer was going to be, it was probably encapsulated, that they would be able to get it all in one surgery, and that he would go on to live a happy, healthy life. So we're all waiting in the operating room, visitor guest room, and waiting for him to come out of surgery. And it didn't take long, but maybe 20, 30 minutes, and his doctor is coming to talk to us, me and his mom and dad and several friends and other family members that were in the waiting room. As we're sitting there, the doctor walks in and he tells us the bad news and how bad it really is. And the doctor said that his cancer he had colon cancer that had metastasized to his liver, and that it had been growing for quite some time, at least a year, and had we caught it a year ago, that his prognosis would have been much improved. And at this point, the cancer was very advanced, and there was nothing that they could do, and all they could do was sew him back up again, wait for him to heal for a few weeks, and then start chemotherapy. And this is what happened. He came out of the operating room, spent some time in recovery, went home for a few weeks to heal, and he then started chemotherapy. The chemotherapy was very rough on him. He was a 6'6" man, about 250 pounds, a big strapping man, very strong and tall. And the chemotherapy immediately started to sap his energy. He started losing weight. He couldn't eat very well. And it was apparent that the chemotherapy was wasting him away. We talked about him continuing. We didn't know any other alternative other than chemotherapy, so we continued on that path. He had gotten all of the chemotherapy that his body could handle. They were, in the meanwhile, they didn't give us much hope. So from there, we tried to branch out, trying to find other alternatives to help him. He started at the Mayo Clinic. He flew to the Mayo Clinic from California, which didn't really help too much. They weren't able to help him because he was too far advanced. We started getting him in on as a research participant for someone with cancer. They told us as well that he was too far along and that there was nothing they could do. We had met a few people who knew something about healthful living, and we are then going to a health food store in Loma Linda, California, and I'm talking to a lady. Her name was Evelyn at the health food store, and she started to share with me about lifestyle issues in treating cancer. So we got on an exercise program, which was pretty minor compared to my understanding now, but it was the best that we knew at the time. We also understood that we had to start eating better because our diet was very high meat, high dairy, lots of eggs, lots of fat in the diet, what I would consider the normal, typical, standard American diet, the SAD diet. Lots of pasta. We had just lots of hamburger, lots of prepared food, like hamburger helper, macaroni and cheese. And if people asked me if I eat fruits and vegetables, I'd say, yeah, I eat corn on the cob in the summertime, or I eat canned corn or canned peas. And sure, I eat fruit. I might eat a couple of apples a year. I mean, who doesn't eat fruits and vegetables? But other than that, that was about the extent of our eating fresh fruits and vegetables. I also understood from Evelyn that we should switch from white rice to brown rice and that we should start eating more fruits and vegetables. In my limited understanding, I switched us from white rice to brown rice. I didn't know how to prepare it, didn't know what to do with it, other than just add a little bit of salt to it, which wasn't really tasty to either one of us coming from such a standard American diet at the time. And then I started adding canned peas and canned corn, canned fruit, which is the limit of our knowledge at that time. We didn't know anything more, and no one told us that we should have fresh. So we did the best that we could. And during the time, Mike was getting weaker and weaker, continuing to lose lots and lots of weight. And it was pretty apparent that he may not make it to our wedding, which was going to be in May of '95. So in the end of June, he started having chemotherapy. July, August, and September, he continued on his chemotherapy. He continued to lose lots and lots of blood. So he was getting blood transfusions on a routine basis. He was being put on one drug after another because of his side effects. And I don't remember how many different medications he was on, but it was several, in order to counteract the side effects of one drug or the chemotherapy or some other symptoms that he was having. So we kind of had a little small pharmacy there for everything that he had to take. During this time, we have family and friends visiting us. We have, we're just trying to figure out what to do, trying to live from day to day. We're trying to still have fun together. And it was pretty apparent that he wasn't going to make it. And Mike's work, which was which was a TCI Cablevision at the time, put on an auction for us. So I could stay off work, so we both could stay off work, for me to be able to nurse him back to health again. And so he wouldn't have to worry about working as he's trying to heal from his cancer. That amount of money that was raised was a pure miracle. Though I was an atheist, he was a non-practicing Catholic. Neither one of us believers, never talked about God, not even on one occasion. And God just really took care of us with that money. And I'll finish that story in a bit. So we continued on with our racing, motorcycling, boating, because we had a nice size cigarette style boat. And we continued to have fun with our family and friends as we continued the life the best that we could. We started finding out other things about what to do with him. So we started getting him on supplements. And eventually we started looking at taking him down to Mexico for some healing, which he was never able to get because he just became too weak and too tired and fatigued, and his condition just got too severe for him to go down there, especially for him to go down by himself. We never considered that he could have had someone come with him like me. So that option became obsolete soon after we found the place. After I would say, this would have been in the end of September of '94, that we always had our birthdays together, because we always had our birthdays were 1 week from each other. And so we always had a very special weekend that between his birthday and my weekend and my birthday, we always went somewhere on that weekend to share our birthdays. This particular year was no exception. We had done what we had always done. We had visited, we had gone to a nice place in Solvang, California. And it was pretty apparent that he was not able to be away from home. He felt terrible. He felt nauseous. He was throwing up all the time. He couldn't eat. He was just very, very sick. So he asked if we could just go home and spend the rest of our weekend there. And of course, I readily agreed. I took us home, and then we started to talk about the seriousness of his condition, which was that we weren't for sure now if he was going to make it to May of '95 for our wedding. So we moved our wedding up to December 17th. From that time now in September, 3 months later, but we still weren't for sure if he was going to make it. When we went to go see the doctor said that he wasn't for sure if he would even make it 3 months to our wedding. But we wanted to give enough time to still have an appropriate wedding. We were still hopeful. Even though we were given no hope, we still remained very hopeful that he would still survive this. We didn't think for a moment, I don't think either one of us thought for a moment that he actually would not make it. We were positive the whole way through. We just did what we could do and implemented the knowledge that we had. Then for the next couple of months, he continued losing more weight. He continued on with more blood transfusions, more chemotherapy. It was pretty obvious that the chemotherapy was killing him. And there really wasn't much that could be done for him after several months. And then it was around December 9th then that we were told that he probably wouldn't make it for one more day, probably wouldn't make it for 24 hours, and probably would not make it to our wedding, which was on the 17th, and this was December 9th. We left the doctor's office and we discussed our wedding and the marriage, and we were given zero hope that he had any time left, but we still remained hopeful. We wanted to still get married. I asked him if he would like me to carry on his name. I would have been happy to rear a child for us. However, he said no, that he didn't want a child to grow up without a father. So we forewent that thought, but we did decide to continue to get married, hoping beyond all hope that he would still heal. Now, at that time, we were not living together, and I told him that I wouldn't move in with him unless we were married. And we proclaimed our love to each other still, and we wanted to, if he were to die, I wanted him to leave my husband, not just my fiance, because my heart was so in love, I couldn't imagine the thought of being left a fiance. I wanted the full privilege and honor of being his wife and fulfilling the love of my heart. And he felt the same way. So we moved our wedding up to the next night. That would have been December 10th of 94. We told his mother, and we told a couple of friends and some other family members of our immediate plans and of our quick changing plans. I'd already gotten a dress. He'd already gotten his tux. We'd already gotten really most of the things for our wedding because we were already planning it from May, and we were already gathering things from that time. And we were continuing to gather things over the months. When we said we wanted to get married on that 24-hour notice, then to bump it up from the 17th to the 10th, everything was already in place. Mike's mom, Mary, she talked to a very good friend of hers, Jan Kibbe, and she decided to have the reception at her house. And Mary, Mike's mom, had gotten a priest to marry us on just a 24-hour notice as well in the Catholic church that she attended. And his mother and family and friends all got together, and they called all of our other family and friends, let everybody know to relieve that duty from our plate. And within 24 hours, we were then setting off for our wedding. We got married, then we had a beautiful sit-down wedding, and we had probably over 150 people at our wedding on a 24-hour notice, and had people as far as Florida flying in to see us get married. It was pretty apparent when Mike couldn't even stand up for our wedding that he really didn't have much time left. I didn't want to face the fact that he may not make it. It was very, very hard for me. It was impossible for me to even imagine that he wasn't going to make it. We, after the sit-down wedding, it was a beautiful wedding in this Catholic church. And then we went over to Jan Kibbe's house for the reception. And it was an incredible, incredible experience that happened there. You know, as I mentioned before, Mike was so loved, and everybody was, it was, once you were a friend with him, you were a friend for life. And I recognized that in him, what a quality of a man that he was. He couldn't stand up during the reception, so Jan had set up 2 chairs for us to sit down so people could give us their congratulations. It was quite amazing because it was like it was a lineup. It was a line that didn't stop for about 2 hours. Person after person lined up to say congratulations to us and to say their goodbyes to him. It was people, it was pretty amazing. People, his friends, even his male friends, kissed him on his cheek. People, his friends, whispered things in his ear. It was a very touching and a very beautiful time during these few hours. And after the wedding, we had planned on a honeymoon, but as we left for our honeymoon, Mike had asked me again. He said, I just can't make it. I'm too sick and I'm too tired and I'm too fatigued. Would you mind if we just don't go and we stay home? And I said, absolutely. So we stayed home that night, and the next day, he did, 2 days later, on December 12th, he did end up in the hospital on his deathbed. So here we are, married 2 days, and my husband now is on his deathbed in the hospital. He's got lots of family and friends around to support us, and we're just in discussion. And being an ICU nurse myself, and especially specializing in burn unit ICU, I knew what it was like to see people die. I also knew what all the monitors meant. I knew what all those numbers meant. I knew what was in the IV bags. I knew all the tubes that were in him. I knew what this meant. I saw this picture again and again at my own work, and those things that I had to implement to save the life of my own patients. So I was faced with the reality that he literally only had a few minutes left to live. As I looked at him, I glanced around the room at his family and friends. I saw that Mike was gray, that he could hardly open up his eyes anymore because he was so weak and he was so tired. I could see the monitor. I could see that his breathing was going down, affecting his blood pressure, affecting his pulse. I could see that he wasn't able to move much in bed. And I could hear then through his words that he would sometimes go from one topic in mid-sentence change to a totally different topic, which told me that the toxins were not being released properly through his kidneys or his bowels. And with all those toxins running around in his body, he wasn't able to think too clearly. So it was very difficult to follow him in a conversation because he couldn't follow his own thoughts. When I realized he probably didn't even have 5 minutes left to live, I did ask his family if I could spend a few minutes by myself with him. His family and friends filed out of the room and went down to the waiting room. And I walked into his bedside, and I remember putting my head down, not knowing what to do and not knowing what to think, and where was my future going to lead from now on, because here we are still having bought a house together and having made all of our future plans together. And what is my life going to be like? My head is in my hands, and I'm just with my eyes closed, not being able to really comprehend what's happening in my life at the moment. And I'm now running through my memory of everything that we've done. And through my memory, in a few moments, I was thinking, we've been through surgery, chemotherapy, we tried the Mayo Clinic, we tried diet and lifestyle, we tried research, We tried exercise. We tried supplements. We tried getting him down to Mexico. And I thought, we tried all of these things. What else is there to try? And I'm going to digress a little bit and tell you a story that Jan Kibbe had told Mike and me just before he went into surgery. That would have been in May. And so this is now December. And I'm going to digress back to May when Mike was going to surgery. And Jan Kinney had shared with us a story of her life when she was in the ICU. She was in the ICU and hooked up to a ventilator, a breathing machine. And her husband and her doctor are talking over her supposed dead body. She heard them talking about pulling the plug, and she is in her mind trying to yell, and she's screaming, "What do you mean, pull the plug? I'm alive. I'm right here." And she's desperately trying to move her fingers, move her toes, open up her eyelids, trying to speak, and nothing is working. And she realizes that her life and her death have nothing to do with her. And she reached out to God and she said, "God, if you want me to die, then it's up to you. If you want me to live, it's up to you. But I'm completely helpless. I've got a breathing machine that breathes for me, and I can't stop breathing. And I can't make myself live when my husband and my doctor are talking about pulling the plug. My life is literally in somebody else's hands, and there's nothing that I can do. So you choose whatever you want to do. Whether I live or die, it's up to you." And she walked out of the hospital the next day. She was immediately taken off the ventilator and was able to breathe on her own. It was a medical miracle that nobody could understand. So to fast forward again, now back to December, when my husband is laying on his deathbed, he is, and I'm going through in my mind all of these things that we've tried. And the story of Jan Kinney came into my mind as well. And I thought, we've tried all these things. I might as well try Jesus too. It's another thing to try. And to this day, I don't remember if I prayed aloud or if I prayed in silent. I don't remember. But what I do remember are my words. And I said, "God, if you're there, you have to show yourself to me, because I can't believe in a God that I don't know. And 2, please heal my husband." By this time I was crying, and I walked into the bathroom in his private hospital room. I walked back out of the bathroom, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Here he is sitting on the edge of the bed. And the first thing I think of as a burn ICU nurse is, what a poor nurse you are. You can't even tell when someone's dying. What's wrong with you? I didn't even think of my prayer. It didn't even occur to me to think of my prayer that I just had moments before. I was so entrenched in my atheism that, to me, trying my prayer was just trying something new. Is trying something different. After trying chemo, the surgery, and trying all these other things, trying Jesus was just another thing to try. So I'm standing in the doorway of the bathroom, and in this clear, strong voice, he's sitting on the side of the bed, and he said, "Honey, will you do something with me?" And I said, "Sure, what would you like?" And he said, "Will you say the Lord's Prayer?" Well, at that time, what flashed through my mind was, I'm an atheist. You're a non-practicing Catholic. I don't know what the Lord's Prayer is. Do you know what the Lord's Prayer is? That was what was going through my mind. I sat on the edge of the bed with him. He made room for me, and we bowed our heads, and we each heard the Lord's Prayer a couple of times in our life. And we had said a few words here and there, but it was pretty obvious that we had not a clue what the Lord's Prayer was. So when he finally realized he didn't know what the Lord's Prayer was, I didn't know what it was, he said to me, "Would you mind if I used my own words to pray?" And I said, "No, go ahead." And his words were beautiful. He said, "God, if you're there, I would like a little bit of time with my wife, with my new wife. I'm not asking for a lifetime, but I'm asking for a little bit of time. Would you grant that to me?" And then Mike said, "Will you go get my family and friends? I'd like to have a circle prayer." I was an atheist. I had no idea what a circle prayer was. I could kind of imagine what it was if it was descriptive of the words circle prayer, but I had no idea what it was. And I said, "Yes, I will go get your family and friends." I walked out of his room and I knew that there was this, I felt a presence bigger than me, bigger than the room, bigger than the hospital. I felt such massive support and so much love that it startled me. I didn't know who it was, and all I could think about was, "Janie, you're losing it. Your husband's dying, and you're absolutely losing it." But yet I stood in the doorway of his room, and I just kept thinking, now, is this love of me to my husband, or is this what I'm feeling of my husband's love to me? What is this that I'm feeling? And then I realized it wasn't my love for him, and it wasn't his love for me. But I didn't know where it was coming from. And it was big, and it was powerful, and it was comforting. So I knew that I must have been feeling somebody else's aura that was around me, and someone feeling compassion, because that's truly what it was. It was compassion to the nth degree, like I had never known before. So I knew that there was somebody close by that must have been looking at me. Now, keep in mind, this all happened within just several, maybe 15 seconds as I stood in the doorway, trying to realize what was happening to me. I looked around this whole unit where it was a cancer unit with multiple rooms, multiple doctors and nurses always around. We had been there multiple times. We had never been at a moment where we saw nobody. This was a place that was always bustling with activity. But yet this moment, I looked around and there was only one person. But other than that, there was nobody around. And that was a secretary, and her head was buried deep in her work. She was looking down. I could see she was busy. She had not even noticed that I was even at the doorway. So I knew it wasn't coming from her. I looked around the unit to my right. I looked to my left down the hallway and saw nobody. And I thought, how strange that there's actually nobody around here. But yet, where is this love and compassion coming from? I had to physically look at my body. I remember looking at my hands. I remember looking at my legs and my feet, thinking, this love and this compassion is bigger than my body. How can this be? My heart is just overflowing. It was beautiful and peaceful. So I figured somebody must have seen me as I was coming out the door, and they must have just been busy and had to walk away. So I thought, well, maybe somebody walked down the hallway. So I hightailed it very fast down to the hallway where there was an intersection, and I hurriedly looked left and right. And again, this very busy unit and this very busy floor had nobody. There was nobody around, not one single person. So I stood in that junction of the hallway for several seconds again, just thinking about, what is this that's happening? Where is this compassion coming from? It's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's peaceful, it's nurturing, and I want it. It was just so deep inside of me. And at that moment, I realized three things were now in my mind. Three things that just popped in there that were not for me. One is that Jesus was a man. Jesus was a real man, and he was God. He was both fully man and fully God. And Jesus was God was the second thing that immediately came to my mind. And the third thing was that I can trust the Bible completely. In my atheistic mind, I had these new thoughts bouncing back and forth between atheism, Jesus was God, because I always wondered, why can't a woman be God? Why does it have to be a man? But yes, that Jesus was man who walked on the earth as God, and that I could fully trust the Bible. And then I'm still having these atheistic thoughts bouncing in my mind, thinking, where did these thoughts come from? Because how did I know to believe this when I'm an atheist? Anyway, it was very confusing to me, but I was basking in this feeling that I had wrapped around me. A doctor or a nurse or some professional came and hurriedly walked beyond me down into the unit, paid no attention to me, and I was just kind of left with my own thoughts. And I went down to the visitors room where Mike's family and friends were. As soon as I went to the door, I believe that everybody just realized that I was there to say that Mike had just died, because they saw as well that he didn't have much time left. And probably 10 minutes had passed by at least since they had left the room. And I'm here now coming back. And somebody asks, did he die? And I said, no, Mike is alive, and he wants us all to come back and have a circle prayer. Everybody rushed out of the room, rushed down the hallway. I waited last because I was thinking, well, maybe I'm feeling this compassion and this love from a family or friend. So they all walked down the hall in a hurry. I'm walking behind them, and I realized that this love is not even coming from any of them. I couldn't understand it, but walked into the room, and Mike had said, I'd like to have a circle prayer with everybody. A strong, clear voice. Everybody then got in a circle, and we all said a very short prayer of whatever was on our mind. When it came time for me, people had all said their prayer, and when it came time for me, with all of our heads bowed, I remember again that my words, I said, God, please give us some time. I really would like to spend some time with my new husband, and please heal him. And for some reason, I really realized that those words were not directed to anybody in that room. I knew that somehow those words were beyond the ceiling, the walls, and the people in that room. And there was some realization that I knew that something in heaven, or I didn't, because of my atheistic thoughts, I didn't really know how to think about it. But I knew that somebody beyond that room was listening to my prayer. It was so powerful and so big and so overwhelming that it actually took several of us, years to discuss it with one another about what happened in that room. Because years later, his dad's girlfriend had told me that it was so overwhelmingly powerful that she couldn't even speak of it. And she had nurtured that throughout the last couple of years, and she too had become a Christian. Though she didn't mention it really at all, but she nurtured those thoughts, and as she was sharing, she told me that was a night that changed her life as well as mine and many others in that room. Those who had given up faith years ago and backslid, many of them have renewed their faith. Many who were not Christians at all ever became Christians and born again at that moment. It literally was a time that changed our life of so many people. After that circle prayer, I'm still feeling this massive amount of love. And then all of a sudden, I saw the monitors. The monitors evened out. I realized that he had a strong heartbeat again. His respirations were no longer erratic. He was no longer gray, but he had a nice kind of a pale color to him instead of gray and death. He still looked sick, but he had still a glow of health about him and a glow of strength about him. And just like Jan Kinney walked away from the emergency, the ICU when she was telling her story, Mike walked away from the hospital the next day as well. We all thought, the doctors knew it was a medical miracle. The nurses couldn't explain it. Nobody could really explain it. They just said that they rarely ever see anything like this happening. And to enjoy the time that we have together. Mike was discharged the next day. I went to go get our car, which was a Z28 that had been lowered. It had been the pace car for the nationals of the national race cars of that year. So it was decked out with everything that was pretty awesome for a couple of speed freaks and adrenaline junkies. And with a T-top on the roof, and it was a very, very fast, hot car. So I went to go get the car, and Mike is waiting for me at the entrance of the hospital, and we get him into the car, and I'm sitting in there, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, that feeling that I had in the hospital is in Mike's room, and the same in the hallway, and even the same walking back to Mike's room is still there. And then I explained all this to Mike, and I said, boy, it just seems like somebody's in the car with us. Now, if you know what a Z28 looks like, it's got a hatchback, and I was able to look in the trunk through the rear view mirror, reflecting into the trunk, and I had my clear T-tops on. So I looked at the ceiling of the car just to see if there was somebody on the car. And I looked in the back seat to see if someone was back there. And I said, boy, it just feels like somebody's in the car with us. And he said, yeah, I know exactly what you mean, because I feel the same thing. And I told him that, so he also looked around, and he couldn't find it, find the person. We got home, and it was nighttime by this time, and I am walking into the house, and I realized, and I walked to the back bedroom to get his wheelchair, and I realized as I was walking through the house that I had walked through a completely dark house. Now, for many of you, that may not mean anything, but to me, that meant everything, because I had a real terror of the dark. When I would get home at night, all the doors would be open. I'd look under the bed, look in the shower. I'd look in all the cupboards in the kitchen, anywhere where somebody could hide. I looked. I left my lights on when I slept. I never went outside at night after dark. And if I had to go to my car in the dark, I was just paranoid. It was a real fear of the dark. And I realized I had no fear of the dark. And that feeling that was in the hospital, in the car, and was now in our home. And something gave me so much peace that told me that everything is going to be okay, and I don't have to be afraid of the dark anymore, and I will take care of you. And I just thought, who's walking outside that's going to be my guard dog, that's going to make sure that no one's going to break in, or I'm going to be fine. Where is this thought coming from? Because this thought came to me just as strong as the other thoughts that Jesus was a man, Jesus walked on this earth as God, and that the Bible was true. This was another thought that was exactly the same. It just popped into my head, and I knew it was true. I didn't want this feeling to go away. I didn't want whoever was in the house to go away, because it was, and I truly believe that person was in the house, because I just didn't understand. And so I did not turn on any lights because I didn't want him to disappear. I went through the dark house completely again and went to go get Mike, brought him into the house. And when he looked into the house and it was completely black, he looked up at me from his wheelchair and he said, "It's dark." And I said, "I know." And I said, that feeling that we've had in the car and in the hospital is in the house again. So I didn't want him to go away. So he understood, because he knew that feeling as well. There we were then for the next 38 days. We were able to take our family out boating. We did a little bit of motorcycling. We took walks. We just had the most beautiful times together over that next 38 days. We were married a total of 40 days. And one of my prayers to God was that he not die alone, that I not be at the grocery store, that I may not be in the shower and come out and he's dead, that I may not come home from an appointment somewhere or doing an errand, that he be dead. My prayer, I must have prayed it thousands of times, literally. I prayed it multiple times a day, multiple times an hour. Please, God, if this is you, don't let him die alone. I want him to die in my arms. And when Mike and I had talked about the possibility and the reality of him dying, he told me that he wanted to die in the arms of his two favorite women, his wife and his mom. During those 38 days, Mike would wake me up in the middle of the night with a verse on his mind. And he would want me to read the Bible. My mom had sent us a Bible, and I would fumble through the Bible. It took me probably 5 minutes to find every verse that he ever wanted me to look up, because I didn't know my Bible at all and never even looked in one before. And he would wake me up, and the words would be so encouraging. He would do this night after night, and day by day we would have family and friends visiting, and by night he would wake me up. So on this January 19th of 95, Mike tried to wake me up again to read a verse to him, but I was too exhausted because I had been up for 3 days and 3 nights, and I just couldn't stay awake anymore. So finally, after he tried to wake me up several times and I couldn't wake up, finally he told me, "Will you help me to the bathroom?" And we had a bedside commode for him, and I said yes. So he got me out of bed through that way and woke me up that way. I got out of bed and helped him to the bedside commode, and then he sat there for a minute and he said, "I just want you to know how much I love you, and had I known how wonderful it was going to be married to you, I would have forced you to marry me years ago." And he told me several other most beautiful things that a wife longs to hear from her husband. He told me so many beautiful things. And then he told me, "It's time to go." And I said, "Go where?" And he said, "It's time to go." Of course, I knew clearly what that meant. And he said, "Will you get me a water?" And I said, "Are you still going to be here when I come back?" And he said, "Yes." So I hurried as fast as I could to go get him a glass of water. And I came back into the room we locked eyes, very lovingly and peaceful for that moment. And then I knew that he had had a stroke and he slumped over. His mom happened to be sleeping in the next room, which she had not spent the night with us at all before, but we had happened to ask her to sleep sleep with us as a guest in the guest bedroom that night. And so I called his mom. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I told her that I needed help lifting him onto the bed. She hurriedly came in, and we lifted now what was a 250-pound man, probably 170 by now. And we lifted him up like a feather onto the bed, like he didn't weigh anything. And I know now that there were angels attending us to lift this dead weight. We lifted him up onto the bed. He was having troubles breathing. So I got behind him, lifted up his back, and sat him up with his back next to my chest. And his mother sat on the bed next to him, holding his hand. And it didn't take but just a few minutes. And he took a few breaths that were difficult for him. And I'll tell you, for those few minutes as an ICU nurse, that it was very, very difficult to not call 911 or to do any life-saving interventions, because my job was to save the life of people, not to just sit back and watch them die, especially my own husband. And I doubted my own efforts at even being a good nurse, because here I was saving the world, but yet couldn't even save my own husband. And he died in the way that he wanted to, and that was in the arms of his two favorite women. After we had made the phone call to the coroner's office and did what we needed to do, and made the funeral preparations, which we had already been doing for the last few weeks. Then after the funeral, we had, I asked my brother to go up to Oregon to my grandparents with me. So he had drove this would have been from San Bernardino, California to Portland, Oregon area. So many, many hours drive. And all those hours I'm sharing with my brother what I was going through. All the love and the compassion and the empathy and the support and the guardianship and my guard dog and the peace and the comfort. And that how I would have to look at my hands and look at my legs and my feet and physically look at my body and see that the love that I had within me was larger than my physical body. I would tell him about my experiences, about Mike waking me up at night and how the Bible had been coming to life for us. And we'd be reading the Bible and how we were seeing our own lives in the lives of people in the Bible. Then we started to apologize to each other. We started to apologize to other people that we had wronged. We started making everything right between us. So there were no regrets. And it was a period of great cleansing, and the Bible was just coming to life as in animation, and it was becoming so clear. And I knew that what I was reading was truth, but yet in my mind, I was still bouncing my atheistic thoughts. Finally, we get to, and we're about 4 hours before Portland. And then I was just quiet and contemplative for a moment after spending hours and hours and hours on the road with my brother, telling him what had just been happening and transpiring in our lives as Michael was going through the dying process. And then I thought to myself, and I'm quiet at this moment, and I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if I'm just going crazy. Am I conjuring up these feelings on my own because my husband's died and I'm just trying to figure out a way to deal with this? Is this a coping mechanism, or what's happening with me? So I thought, I wonder if I can just make this feeling disappear. And just like that, the feeling disappeared and I became suicidal. Because when Mike was going through the dying process, I told him that when he died, I would die too. I already knew that I would take our Grand Am, our Trans Am, and I would, without a seatbelt, just drive off a cliff of the mountain that we live by. It was a peaceful thought to me. I just wanted to be with him if there was an afterlife. I didn't know if there was an afterlife, but I knew on that December 12th, I knew that I was not allowed to take my life. Just something told me that that was not something that I should do. And I had not even thought about it until that moment when I asked myself, I wonder if I can make this thought disappear. And it did. I became suicidal, and my brother at freeway speeds is driving, and all of a sudden I start grabbing for my seatbelt and I start to panic, and I start to cry uncontrollably. And I'm trying to undo my seatbelt, but yet my brother, with his right hand, he's holding on to my seatbelt, holding the steering wheel with his left hand, and he's holding my seatbelt, and I'm pounding on his hands, telling and screaming at him, telling him to let it go, let me go. I just want to jump out of the car, and I just want to die. And he's like, "What happened? What happened?" And I'm frantic, not understanding what's going on. All I know is that peace is gone, the love is gone, the support is gone. There's nothing. I'm just a completely empty shell, and I was now heartbroken, and I now bore the entire pain of my husband's death upon my shoulders. And the pain was so intense, it was crushing my lungs. I felt my heart being squeezed, and the life being squeezed out of my heart, and it was like an elephant was sitting on my chest, and I couldn't hardly breathe. The pain was just so intense. I just couldn't even handle the pain. And after my brother and I were having this dialogue going back and forth with me telling him, that I just, all these feelings that I just told you that I've been having, I now have been wondering if I could make it go away, because I'm wondering if I'm just going crazy and I'm just doing this as a coping mechanism. And now it's gone. And I said, "Let go of my seatbelt, let go." And I'm still hitting his hands. And he said, "I will only let go if you promise me that you're not going to jump." And I slumped back in the seat and I said, "I promise." And he just continued to drive. And for the next several hours, we drove in complete silence. I said not a word. He said not a word. And I just slumped. I had no life left in me. I was an empty shell with so much pain that was bigger than me physically again. I looked at my hands and I looked at my legs and my feet, realizing that the love that I had that was bigger than my physical body was now replaced with pain and agony. That how could I ever live like this? How can I live with this kind of pain all by myself? I just didn't know what to do. We got to my grandparents' house and I hugged my grandma and grandpa, and I just said, "Grandma, Grandpa, I love you, but would you mind if I just go into my room, just go to bed right now, because I'm just really tired." It was about 8 p.m. And my grandma and grandpa said yes, and told me good night. I went into my bedroom. I knelt down on the floor before my bed, and I'm finally realizing that maybe I'm not an atheist anymore, that maybe this really is God, and maybe that when my prayer really started to come to me when I prayed at the bedside when Mike was dying, and now it's all coming back to me, and I'm thinking about how all these thoughts that these beliefs, these new beliefs that I've had. I'm thinking of my new beliefs about Jesus being God. I can trust the Bible. Jesus was fully man, fully God. in all the life, the Bible coming to animation, the verses that Perry would Mike would wake up with, how encouraging they were. I just started replaying all that in my mind, and I thought, maybe I'm not an atheist anymore, and that this really is God. So on my knees, I said, God, if this is really you, please forgive me. I didn't know what I was pushing away. Please help me to know if this is you again. Please come back, and I promise to never do this again. I don't want this pain. I think that you've been upholding me. I think you've been sharing my pain and my burden with me, though it hasn't been released. But I know that my pain has been burdened. It's that you've carried my burden with me, and I want that back again. Please come back and forgive me. I'm just crying and weeping, and I didn't even stand up. From the kneeling position, I just crawled into bed, and I just went to sleep, and I just said to God, please, I just want to die. I don't want to wake up in the morning. Just take my breath away as I sleep. I know that I'm not supposed to take my own life, but please, just you take my life. You make me not wake up in the morning. And I just went off to sleep with those thoughts. I woke up in the morning with a whole new sunshine in my heart. All that love and compassion and empathy and protection, it all was back again. I got back on my knees and I said, God, this really is you. You really did answer my prayer, didn't you? This really is. I'm not an atheist anymore. I'm actually a Christian. And that peace that passes all understanding came just flooding over me with the confirmation in my mind, instant knowledge again, that yes, this is me. And when that voice came in, it was beautiful. It was strong. It was encouraging. It was a voice and a peace that I knew that I would never have to doubt. It was a peace and protection and love that I knew I could always count on. I knew at this time that I had lived my life for myself, and that I was no longer going to live my life to myself. For my life verse then became Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified by Christ, yet nevertheless I live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God who loves me and gave himself for me. That became my life verse. And then I started reading about Paul and the beautiful conversion that Christ brought him on the way to Damascus, and how evil he was, but what a transformed character God brought him into. And I realized that's what God brought me into. I started proclaiming the message all over to my family, to my friends. When I finally went back to work 2 months later, I started proclaiming the message to my patients, to the nurses and the ancillary staff that I was working with. How could I not? How could I not realize that God did not have to save Mike before he died? It was a complete gift to me and a complete gift to Mike. And I realized that gift would take me through for the rest of my life, that I'm now the one who has to run the good race if I want to see him again. And I just thank God for the mercy that he's poured out upon me. I thank God for the time that he has invested in me. And I thank him for the strength that he's given me to live a life of faith. I would like to just end with a prayer, just thanking God for all he's done. And I invite you to listen to part 2 of my testimony of how I came from this point in my new Christian walk and how I became a Seventh-day Adventist and found the truth of the Bible. Let us pray. Our dear God, our testimonies are never about a person. Our testimonies are about the indwelling power of the Holy Spirit. We thank you, God, so much for the way that you work with each one of us. We thank you, Lord, that you take us from wherever we are and you take us to where you want us to be, as long as we're willing. Continue to make us willing, Lord, for it's not where we are on the path, but it's that we're on the path, what matters. Because some of us are farther and some of us are more along than others, or less farther along than others. But what matters is that we're all on that path, because even the thief on the cross, Lord, was saved on that fateful day. And we thank you for your love and your mercy and the way that you reach out to sinners. We thank you that you reach out to just the common man and woman and child, just where we are, and you love us just where we are, but you continue to work with us. Continue to draw each one of us, Lord, into your grace and your mercy and your salvation. In Jesus' holy, precious name I pray. Amen.